Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel for the first time if you've never been here before. My name is Madeline and I am running a short series this mental health week. Happy mental health week. Oh my goodness, I should have probably started off with that. I'm running a short series talking about different aspects of mental health in different aspects of life. A little bit about me. I have done a master's in mental health studies as well as an undergraduate in psychology, so that is a lot of psychology. I am an actor and unemployed. Unemployed being the main way to describe myself. And because I'm very unemployed, I have time to go down these research rabbit holes, and this is really just me presenting all of the information and thoughts that I have to you so we can all talk about it together, especially this week because it's mental health week and I spent a lot of time thinking about mental health. Another thing I need to mention is that everything I talk about is not in association with any charity, organization or institution. It is rather just casual observation, research and opinion mixed in together with interest in order to talk about it all together and in general. Another thing to mention is that if you have been from my last video, which is about Formula One and mental health, is that I am still sick. I am still sick the same way I was sick in that video, so please forgive me. I will try and make it as less gross or least gross as possible because being sick is kind of gross and I just don't want to gross everyone out, and I have to be honest about it because if I'm not honest about it now, I have to be honest about it later, and it's better to be honest about it now. So yeah, please forgive me because I do have to sneeze sometimes and I'm still breathing out of my mouth, and it's carnage, it's horror, it's Alice horror, and it's just all a bit part of the human experience, I guess. The final thing that I need to mention is that I do have notes, so every time you see my attention kind of go somewhere else or divert somewhere else, it is because I'm reading off of notes, because I can't remember everything, and how can I communicate anything if I can't remember most of it? So that is why we have notes here on the side, and this is a very note heavy video. It's actually in a very different tone in comparison to the last video, which we're going to do a summary of, which was Formula One and mental health. So in the last video, Formula One and mental health, we talked about public perception of mental health, men and mental health, how the public can weaponize mental health against people who speak out about it, how that interacts with gender and sports elitism, and all of that mixed in together, honestly. And today we are talking about something completely different, but it still answers the initial question that we had at the beginning of last video, and that is how psychological and mental health information is received, digested and reflected in public spaces, especially online ones. So that the last video was kind of F1 specific. This is kind of attacking that question head on, and the subgenre of the bigger overall question and is what we're focusing on today, and that is the change in perception of mental health conditions because of the distortion of psychological language used in social media. A hefty title, a big one, and obviously we will not be able to do all of it, but we will definitely be able to address some of it. So I overall love this topic. This is everything I read to do with the topic. This video is a lot different than the last one because the last one we were going through the research, where rather I did a lot of reading beforehand, and now I'm presenting this information to you. But overall, I love this topic. And I think I love it because I hate pop psychology. Maybe hate is a bit of an aggressive and a strong word, but I think I definitely lean on the dislike of pop psychology more than anything. And the reason why I find this fascinating is because pop psychology is kind of a product of its own success, right? We live in a time where mental health and psychological information is widely available. It's openly available. Resources are widely and openly available, and treatment is also widely and openly available. I am excluding things such as paywalls, as well as, I guess, wait times and all that stuff, even though those things are definitely things that reduce access and availability to mental health and psychological resources. There's still a lot of information that exists now that is free and readily available in comparison to, I don't know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So we definitely operate in a time where we have way more mental health and psychological resources than previously, especially as members of the public. And what is really fascinating is that we live in an era where social media is one of those driving forces of information when it comes to psychological knowledge and psychological things in general. And I guess the overall question we're asking, or what we are trying to understand, is how does, in our generation, a generation that has access to all of these resources and is open about mental health conditions and mental health things in general, how does that affect and distort or have, you know, weight on our perception of all of these concepts in general? What trends, what doesn't trend, what is stigmatized, what isn't stigmatized anymore, what gets destigmatized? And I've kind of split it into two. I've split it into the weaponization of mental health language and then understanding mental health concepts in general. I'm just trying to break it up a little bit because it is a really big and weighty topic. So I think the first thing we're going to do is address my flowchart. So my flowchart is something that I made for one of my videos. I didn't actually draw the flowchart, so this is actually nice because we get a drawing of the flowchart, but it was something I've spoken about in general. I've spoken about this topic twice now. Again, I said this is going to be my third time. I love this topic. So my flowchart is about how does the mental health or psychological language become distorted from when it's first presented to the public. So the first thing I wrote in the flowchart is the mental health condition is presented in full representation. And I am taking this mainly from an online perspective. So you watch a video or you are informed about something, a mental health condition, mental health phenomena in its full entirety. It's not an incorrect representation of the condition in general. So that is presented to the public or the person in full representation, and people remember what is easy, common, and relatable. So, for example, if depression is presented to me, I may remember low mood as a very important aspect of depression because it's easy to remember. It's one of the most common aspects of depression, and maybe I've had low mood before, so it's something that I can relate to. So that is all just remembered, and because of that, the mental health condition is naturally reduced. I don't actually think this process is a bad thing. It's the way that we remember a lot of information at once, but it is definitely reduced to a lesser form of the full representation that we were presented. And because it has been reduced, there will naturally just be gaps in people's knowledge when it comes to mental health conditions overall in general, and those gaps are then naturally filled with different aspects. And a lot of the time when those gaps are filled, they are filled with either misrepresentations or incorrect information. And even if they're not filled by an external source, we may internally fill them to make sure that we have a whole picture of what something is, even if it's not the full accurate representation. So from that, language and the public perception of these mental health conditions is distorted overall. And this is kind of my makeshift way of understanding, or from my casual observation, understanding how mental health in general, mental health conditions, anything to do with mental health or psychology really, is misunderstood, misrepresented, and then, you know, brought into effect as we interact with it publicly at the same time. And with short form content being the main way a lot of people consume content and information right now, when it comes to short form content, especially when people have to pick up on certain things, when you are presented with full representation of something, we've been consuming so much short form content, you're not going to remember everything that someone says. And because of that, we are already functioning on a bias, right? When, as mentioned before, if someone is picking what is common, what is easy, and what is relatable, you are already functioning on a bias when interacting with certain information, and that goes for the same with mental health conditions. The only thing that could either obstruct that bias is your personal experience, your personal knowledge, anything else. But I'm really taking this from someone who has never really interacted with certain mental health conditions before. I feel like we do have a lot of information presented to us about anxiety and depression, but rather those highly stigmatized mental health conditions. So bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD, even, I think narcissistic personality disorder, the things that people may not understand in full entirety, and how that is taken and understood. And the reason why I think that this is important is because you can see it in effect, especially when it comes to things on social media. So the public may see someone have a high emotional response to something, and that response will automatically get funneled into a mental health condition, whether that person has a mental health condition or not, because of a certain emotion that is being exhibited. No matter what you do, because of the way that people have understood mental health conditions and psychological knowledge in general, you will get funneled into, you have this mental health condition. And that's how we, have the problem of people diagnosing people on the internet with the information that they have received and been given. And that's why I mentioned it is a victim of its own success. And the effect of that is that now, as public members of the public in online spaces, and I guess in practice, in real life in general, we are now unable to distinguish, kind of blurred the lines as things get distorted. And one of the reasons, or one of the things that has definitely blurred the lines when it comes to things such as this, is definitely the weaponization of therapy speech in general. I think when it comes to therapy speech in general, the weaponization of it is kind of a way for people to be disillusioned into emotional intelligence. It's definitely on the back ends of people needing to pathologize. Gosh, that's a hard word. Definitely in effect of people needing to pathologize everything. But I do think it also is a way for people to disillusion themselves into having emotional intelligence as well as connection. If I'm able to reduce this behavior into these boxes that I know definitely exist in society, I am understanding it to a better level. It's kind of the back end of being able to intellectualize your emotions rather than feel them. And in a way, it is all kind of performance, and whether people do this purposely or not is really not up for debate, is not really the question I'm asking. It's rather, this is something that we do. And in no way is this a judgment on people who do this. People who are not in psychological spaces, especially psychological academic spaces, are not going to remember every single thing to do with every psychiatric condition ever. We are interacting with psychology in a casual and public way. You are bound to make mistakes, you are bound to misunderstand something, but it is worth mentioning that the portrayal of certain mental health conditions and the way that information is being received does have errors in it. And I think one of the ways that we see this have errors is that people don't understand when it comes to classification and diagnosis. That is a full picture of something. I think one thing that we see trending right now in general, and it's been trending for a very long time, is narcissistic personality disorder. Not every egotistical, self-centered person is going to have narcissistic personality disorder, but that may be enough for them to be an unpleasant person. And I think that is the problem when I talk about the way that people cling onto specific aspects of certain things. And in no way is me saying this mean that the person you think has narcissistic personality disorder doesn't have narcissistic personality disorder, but I do think people are very quick to jump onto certain psychiatric, psychological conditions because they are aware of the key markers of certain conditions, remembering what is easy, common, and relatable. And this is kind of where the line between pathologizing and regular human experience gets blurred. And in general, there have been benefits to this communication of language in general. Once upon a time, the term abuse wasn't so all-encompassing. A lot of the times when it comes to things of abuse, people don't even realize that they are being abused, but because the language around that word has changed, people are now able to understand and see different aspects that fall under abuse. This is no way a direct criticism of the benefits that we get when it comes to having more open discussion when it comes to mental health language. We can see stigma falling, we can see people really interacting with mental health conditions and educating and learning. But at the same time, again, it's a victim of its own success. So that is just one of the things. But therapy speak in general, being mixed into colloquial language, is not new news, right? And in fact, a lot of the times when we interacted previously, when we interacted with therapy speech in colloquial language or psychological language in colloquial language, it was really a matter of insult. A lot of the terms that we know now have been used to offend people. And I often wonder whether the way that we're doing it now is, or by having these terms in the way that we interact with them now, is something similar but different in effect. I don't think people are out here doing things in order to insult people, but definitely a byproduct of the way that therapy speech as well as psychological language is used now is that it reduces a lot of these real life experiences by people with psychiatric conditions to certain spectacles. And we will get onto this later. I'll probably make another video about it, but rather like understanding mental health conditions in a way that is spectacleized. I don't know if that's a word, but understanding mental health conditions in a way that has been presented as a spectacle is often the roots of how we understand mental health in general. And I do think that sometimes we have blurred the lines and drawn a bit of a small bridge between that and definitely misunderstanding mental health conditions in general. So this kind of just distorts the human experience, because then we end up asking ourselves, what is mental health? What is mental health in general? And I remember reading a resource that talked about being able, or institutions being able to interact with these online spaces so that there is more of communication in general to combat the misinformation, to present accurate psychological knowledge and accurate representations of what psychological conditions look like. And even then, with accurate representations, because you have to combat the misrepresentation, this is where shock comes in, and this is where people sometimes will have negative reactions to what a condition actually looks like. One example I can give is with OCD. A good part of the communication when it comes to psychological stuff in general is that we are now able to know that OCD is not just the stereotypical idea of cleaning and wanting things to be clean and germs, but then those other stigmatizing aspects of OCD are brought to surface, and people are unable to interact with them the same way that they have been able to do before, because their representation of what OCD looked like has changed. If the mental health condition that is being represented doesn't kind of represent what the public perception of what it should looks like that, we can often see the backlash on how the public actually reacts to what that mental health condition is or what it looks like. So that is also really interesting. Overall, that is all to say, why does this matter? Why should we care? Who cares, in fact? And one thing that I mentioned in my previous video talking about this is, if you are not going to experience a mental health condition on a personal level, whether that is with yourself or with someone that you know, the only form of interaction or representation you get about mental health conditions is going to be from media, social, as well as movies and etc. It will be from media, because that is really how it is being represented in all forms. And it is important and necessary that not only for the people with these conditions, but as humans, that we are owed a respectable, accurate, and all-rounded representation of what these mental health conditions, what mental health knowledge is in general. I think it helps with destigmatization, it helps with treatment, and it helps with overall understanding people in general, which is currently what psychology is. It is what psychology is in general. It is all about understanding people. And the reason why psychology has a subsection of pop psychology is because we all try and understand the human experience, and psychology is definitely about trying to understand the human experience, and anything that humans can grab on to get a little bit closer to understanding each other is definitely going to be popular, is definitely going to be worth their time. And not everyone will be able to understand that altogether, because that's what degrees are for. But I do think that we should be able to communicate those ideas effectively and definitely combat misinformation. So it's all about that, and it's also about I guess the ethics of social media, and how we interact with social media in general, and what is ethical when we put stuff out there. And I in no way think that anyone who's talking about their lived experience in any condition is trying to misrepresent these conditions at all, but rather the way or the narrative that the public and society drives when it comes to understanding these psychological conditions. So that was my little spiel, my little essay about all of that. A much different approach to this sort of video. Last time we went through research and we spoke more casually. This was way more formal, and I hope that that's not too bad. But thank you so much for sitting and talking with me and listen to me ramble about different psychological things for at least half an hour. If you have any other thoughts, be sure to comment, and and I will be leaving some mental health resources in the comments for anyone who needs them, and I will see you guys later. Bye!